We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
Houston, Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed.
Roger, Tranquility. We copy you.
All step off the limb now. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Today we will visit Kennedy Space Center on the Florida Space Coast. Traveling north on I-95, we approach Palm Bay. We are now entering the southernmost city of what is considered the Florida Space Coast.
Take exit 223 on right to state code 46, then keep left.
And 75 miles to the north is Titusville.
Keep left onto Highway 46, then turn left.
We will stay, as a matter of fact, at the Titusville KOA, 20 miles away from the Kennedy Space Center. But that's the closest we could get in a short notice.
Arriving on left.
Just a quarter mile off I-95. Too early for the office to be open, but we find our reservations hanging up and go right to our site. Clubhouse. It's a nice campground, all paved sites and all amenities. But we will not hang out at the campground. We unhooked the towed H3, we parked the motorhome and head over to the Space Center. That is our mission. It's a beautiful drive to Merritt Island once you start over the NASA Causeway into the NASA Parkway. If you didn't know, you could never imagine there's a Space Center and Air Force Base here. NASA has done a beautiful job conserving the natural habitat next to it. This is where it all began in the early 60s. If you were a kid like me and remember watching on TV the first man in space and the first man on the moon, this is where it all was thought of, put together, and shot up to the stars. The most ambitious leap made by mankind in the 20th century started here. During this last decade or two, the leap went even further. From the Mercuries and Apollos to the shuttles, which could be reused over and over. Like the one called Atlantis. We'll learn about it today. But then we're past that too. As of this moment, they're working on a mission to send humans on Mars. You believe that? Yep. We will be hearing about that today as well. So follow us in this journey to remember the beginnings, the progress up to the present, and the plans into the future of the new frontiers. One thing that's easy to miss is the old countdown clock that's to the left as you come in. It was placed there after the new one took its place just recently. And this thing was around since 1969, did all the Apollos and the shuttle, and it's the second most watched countdown clock in the world. Pretty cool. Just past the ticket booth, a beautiful memorial fountain to our 35th President John F. Kennedy that really encouraged the race to land the first man on the moon. And engraved on the marble is a quote from his famous speech to inspire the enormous task. If you ever hear the entire speech, it is really inspiring. Speaking of inspiration, Heroes and Legends is the newest building here, and it's really not to miss. It's next to the Rocket Garden. It starts in a waiting area. They show normal everyday people that talk about who inspired them in their life. Then the 4D theater. You get to experience the beginning of the space age. And as you exit, you get to see some actual artifacts like the Sigma 7 capsule on the Mercury. It's really neat. You can actually see the controls, how 3 astronauts are cramped in there. There's a lot to do and see in here. The humongous one laying down, that's the Saturn I. These things are huge. They remind me of Egyptian obelisks. See if I can get that fountain. Here it is.
I think we're watching another show before we go in.
Please step quickly, but carefully into the theater, filling in all available space. Guests with wheelchairs.
My father was a hero of mine.
A hero is someone I respect, like my mom.
My hero is my mom, and she inspired me to be a good person.
I think my hero would be Winston Churchill.
Elon Musk. Take it away.
My greatest hero was my maternal grandfather.
This ought to be interesting.
What a beautiful view. Docking and operating combined spacecraft was a key element of the Apollo strategy. 2, 1, we were on our own.
We take out these mix. Roger that.
The first flight to go around the moon. My hero looked up at that flaming candle taking off for the stars. It all came full circle, and my journey took me beyond my wildest dream places like the moon.
That was cool. Here's the Sigma 7 capsule on the Mercury. It's still attached. It's really neat how you can see in there. You see the controls and how the 3 astronauts were cramped in there. These are what I call inspirational boots of astronauts and engineers, and what motivated each of them from childhood to adulthood.
161. Best gas. Alright. Let me stop. It's written over there.
Mercury Control Center. This is the actual equipment used in Mercury missions from the early 60s. And just reading the sign here, these men were very dedicated people. Down this hallway is the Astronaut Hall of Fame. That's an awesome statue of Alan Shepard, the first American in space.
Yeah. New car. How is the thumbs?
Is it clear?
This area, it's all thumbs, guys. Astronauts love thumbs up. All right.
This place looks good. There's some good places to eat here.
Somebody's saying hello, look.
Hi. Johnny's scared.
Thumb.
Let's see, according to my guide, this is a replica of the capsule Orion 1. This is something you won't forget, a Mars exploration rover, all made out of Legos. It's pretty cool. Look close how detailed it is. You can see the Legos up close, but from afar, you really can't. Wow. We're ready for the bus tour.
Now, as I turn the corner, I would like to bring your attention to this one little rocket standing there all by itself. That is a Mercury Redstone rocket. That is the exact type of rocket we put Alan Shepard into space with over 50 years ago, back in 1961. That little black cone-shaped object at the top, that's the capsule. Those capsules didn't even have a hatch in them as we know it today. It had a panel that they bolted shut from the outside. None of the astronauts cared for this because they all knew if anything went wrong, down, there is no way out for them. So they had some very spirited discussions. Matter of fact, those discussions got so intense that the astronauts actually had a completely different name for themselves. They didn't call themselves astronauts at all. They called each other Spam and a Can.
It was built for the Apollo program in the 1960s and stands 525 feet or 160 meters high. The American flag you see on the front is 21 stories tall.
So that actually does become the largest painted American flag in the world. It is 21 stories tall. Those stars are 6 feet across. Wow. The stripes are 8 feet wide.
Today, the VAB is being updated to assemble our next human-rated launch vehicle. The SLS is the most powerful rocket in history and has an evolvable design that ranges from 321 to 384 feet tall.
When that comes out to the launch pad on the crawler, the weight of all of that equipment will be approximately 20 million pounds.
Astronaut Alan Shepard took his ship Freedom 7 6.5 miles into space. America had its first space hero. Just a few days later, our space program received a new challenge from our young president. In one inspiring moment, he changed the mission.
We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other thing. Not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
We would have to design a rocket, put it together with the precision of a microscope, and accelerate it to the speed of a bullet. Then we would have to guide it to a moving target 250,000 miles away.
Mission Control Apollo 8 with the actual consoles to recreate the launch.
Had made their final preparations before taking that long ride out to the waiting spacecraft. The minimum safe distance from a Saturn V at liftoff was 3 miles. When fully fueled, the rocket contained the explosive power of an atomic bomb. If a maneuvering thruster failed, if communications broke down, if navigation was off by 1 degree, if any piece of the miles of wiring, circuits, relays, or valves was defective, Frank Borman, Jim Lovell, and Bill Anders would pay with their lives. Launch of Apollo 8, right here where it actually happened. Mankind is about to leave his planet behind and journey to another.
This is launch control. T-minus 3 minutes and counting. 60 seconds and counting. Vehicle now is completely pressurized. 10.
Successfully orbited the moon, and the astronauts returned safely to the Earth. I know. I'm Jim Lovell, and I was one of the crew of this spacecraft, Apollo 8. On the other side of those doors, you'll find an actual Saturn V moon rocket.
And there it is. The first, most powerful, complex machine ever built. We're looking at it. Those engines are huge. You fit 2 motorhomes in there and room to spare. The Saturn rocket of Apollo 8. Just imagine how many nuts and bolts, washers, lock nuts, couplings, hose clamps, holy mackerel. Can you imagine that?
talk about motorhomes, this is the van that took the astronauts to the shuttle. Definitely a stick shift. Can't make out what that is. This is the van that carried the 3 astronauts of Apollo 11. Neil Armstrong, Michael Collins, and Edwin Aldrin. Which patch do you think is the coolest? Getting closer. The Eagle has landed.
I have to touch the moon rock.
What a cool patch. Guess you know which one I like. This is a huge model of the Saturn V rocket that's hanging up on the other side. There's a cutout of all the stages. It's amazing when you think. The majority of this beast is the fuel tanks. Most of this comes back to Earth before it reaches orbit. At 363 feet tall, it was split into 3 stages. The first stage was powered by 5-1 rocket engines. This will fall back to Earth after 42 miles. And the second stage, that was powered by 5 smaller J2 rocket engines, takes over. At the same time, the launch escape system blasts off from the top of the command module, since it's no longer needed. The third stage, that was powered by 1 J2 rocket engine, takes over as the second stage blasts off and comes back to Earth at the height of 109 miles. On top of the third stage was the actual spacecraft, lunar module, service module, and command module, which eventually takes the astronauts back home. So all that to put this, the lunar module, on the moon. Here's the command module with the 3 astronauts and still attached to the launch escape system. In case something goes wrong at takeoff, the small rocket will blast off carrying the command module with the astronauts to safety, as you see in the small clip on the left side of the screen. All that to get this little thing on the moon. That's a lunar module. Here's the third stage with the 1 J2 rocket engine after it separates from the second stage. This is the actual command module from the Saturn V rocket hanging above it. The one that's detached from the actual above it, the actual rocket, it's just a prop. Here's a moon buggy used to explore and collect rock samples of the moon. Off-world off-roading, that's funny. That's one cool golf cart, I'll tell you. Notice it's only a 2-seater. Only 2 astronauts land on the moon with the lunar module. So the other stays behind with the command module, circling the moon until they're ready to take off with the lunar module to get back into the command module. This moon buggy will stay on the moon. None of them were ever brought back. There's a spacesuit from Apollo 17. The moon boots right next to it. Here's the space helmet from the headless spacesuit.
Oh, Apollo 14, 1971.
And here's the actual Apollo 14 capsule. It was nicknamed the Kitty Hawk. This capsule carried all 3 astronauts back home. This will come back to Earth, carrying the 3 astronauts by parachuting into the Atlantic Ocean to be rescued by an helicopter. You can see how tight it is inside this capsule. This is an RV with all the comforts of home, that's for sure. This timeline shows all the Apollo missions on the moon and where they landed. Notice Apollo 13 is missing. That's because on April 11, 1970, Apollo 13, that was to be the 3rd mission to land on the moon, an explosion in one of the oxygen tanks crippled the spaceship, and the crew was forced to orbit the moon and return to Earth. They almost didn't make it back. There's a display here in this room that explains the mission and how they got back. This is what they call a lunar sample. It's actually a rock, and it's estimated to be 3.7 billion years old. It was brought back by Apollo 17 in 1979. This is the actual television camera made by RCA, carried by Apollo 7. It was the first time American TV audiences could see the astronauts during the mission. The visor on this helmet was tinted with 24-karat gold to block harmful light. Spacesuit that you can use for extravehicular activities. In other words, you could drive a moon buggy with it. This looks like a fancy model of the moon buggy. And it's finally time for lunch. I tell you, I was waiting for this one. I was hungry. We were all hungry.
He's the best Snoopy on the world. Oh, Snoopy, look, double badge on him. I know.
One last display area, and then we enter another inspirational show of the moon landing, and then we head back to the main complex. Check ignition and may God's love be with you. Calling ground control to Major Tom.
With these first steps, mankind stood on the highest ground, and we saw our planet as our home port in the endless ocean of space.
3, 2, 1.
Ah, there it is. Told you. I forgot about that.
The bus now takes us back to the main complex and do the finale. Atlantis Space Shuttle that flew the last Space Shuttle mission. Looking forward to that. Look at the difference between the Saturn rocket and the Shuttle Atlantis fuel tank with the rocket boosters. What a difference. Here's what you see from everywhere in this park. This is the model of the solid rocket boosters and fuel tank. The actual shuttle is inside. They will do a show first and then the unveiling of it. Let's go take a look.
This wasn't it. They built this whole building for this shuttle. Look at it. Huge. And the trains come out of here. They probably built it around it. You know what I'm saying?
Seeing this live is mind-boggling. Look at that cargo area. You see the crane and Imagine how many satellites this thing carried up there. This is the actual Atlantis that did so many trips. Unbelievable. It's just sitting here like a big monument. It's just mind-boggling looking at this thing. I believe that crane, they call it the Canada crane. I think it was made in Canada if I'm not mistaken. But anyway, there's so many things to do here. We just don't have enough time. We definitely need to come back. They actually have a space shuttle simulator here that gives you the feeling of a takeoff. Wow, we're definitely coming back. There's a memorial of the Challenger shuttle, the twin of this one that blew up back in the 80s. Need to come back and see that, that's for sure. I remember seeing that. I was in the middle of I-95 and pulled over and just looked at it until it just started falling back to the ground. It had the first woman teacher in space. That was so sad. The black lines on the fin, on the top of the tail there, those are tiles. The ones that doesn't make it burn when it does its re-entry. And it has those tiles all along the bottom too. That's the way it comes back on its belly. Similar to the capsules of the Apollos. They had a NASA engineer here answering questions. That was pretty cool. Nice guy. Cool mustache. Atlantis was in service from the first flight in October 3rd, 1985 to its last 33rd and final mission on July 8, 2011, and will never be forgotten here. It's mind-boggling how big those engines are. This is an engine from the shuttle. This thing is huge. And it had 3 of these, right there. Now we can get a good look at the belly tiles, made of coated silica, Li900 silica ceramics. Without this special heat protection, the aluminum structure of the shuttle can never withstand temperatures over 175 degrees. So basically, the shuttle would melt at re-entry to Earth. It's amazing. Each tile has an identification number which tells the batch and the location on the shuttle. In other words, feeding this number into a computer will produce an identical tile in case it gets damaged. That's pretty cool.
That's how big it is. Michelin.
Atlantis ready for launch on the launch pad. This is a model of the shuttle being piggybacked on a Boeing. And what do we have here? Look at this beauty. This must have been another one. This looks a lot more modern than the one they have for the Apollos. An Astronaut RV made by Airstream. Speaking of RV, I think our motorhome is calling us. We need to get back home. So we leave Kennedy Space Center, reflecting on what we just saw today and experienced. Was it a theme park? For the kids it probably was in a way, but they sensed the difference, I can see. Their questions were curiosity of space, adventure. What is the moon? Why did we go there? What did they find? Why did they wear those scary suits? How far is the moon? What is a satellite? I think it was educational for them and had some fun at the same time. Hopefully it inspired them as well. While driving back to the campground, we enjoy a beautiful sunset on the NASA Causeway. We break camp in the morning and start our trip home with some inspiring memories of the unique experience at Kennedy Space Center on the Florida Space Coast. I hope I was able to cram 10 hours into about 30 minutes without missing too much or making it too long. No video can give you the real life experience here. I guess you just have to come and visit. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. And don't forget to subscribe. You can check the end video as well. And after all that, you all have a great day.
There's your shoe. Get your shoe.